Welcome to the Recover You podcast. I'm Kylene.
And I'm Patrick.
We are a couple in recovery
from sex addiction
and betrayal trauma. Together, we share our story to encourage you on your journey. It's here that we talk about sex addiction, betrayal trauma, mental, emotional, and physical health, faith, and anything and everything needed to recover you to your most authentic self that God created you to be.
Hello, everyone. I am doing a solo episode today. So Kylene is off preparing and rehearsing for her show that she is going to have this Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So she's going to be pretty wiped out. So I decided I would take some time and talk through a couple things. This is really directed at the addicts, but I think it's good for the betrayed partners as well, and it's also good for a single person who's an addict as well, because it really does kind of play through there. I'm going to talk about some relational things, but essentially what I'm going to talk about and what I'm going to highlight are some of the things that I say repeatedly, some of the things that I heard repeatedly when I was going through my recovery, and I'm going to highlight some of the tools again. So this is kind of it's a bit of a summary episode. It's an opportunity for me to hopefully supply in one episode and condense down into some bullet points that could be helpful, things to keep in mind, things to remember. And I was thinking through today as I was prepping for this that a lot of times these are the things I consistently say, possibly during check-ins or with my one-on-one time with some of the men that are in the groups that I lead. And so I think it's something that's certainly born out of experience. It's interesting. Kylene said to me, she goes, "What are you going to talk about?" I'm like, "I don't know." And she says, "Well, have you figured it out?" I said, "I'll figure it out." And so I was actually thinking about this because one of the things that the company that I work for is a very high drive company. And one of the things that they say a lot is, "Oh, you guys will figure it out." And I was thinking about this in a lot of ways. And that is true. We have the opportunity to figure it out. But one of the things I've learned in the company is we got to rely on each other. We can't just come up with a single solution. We have to have a lot of input. We have to have a lot of buy-in when we're trying to solve a problem. We have to kind of walk through, what the Army calls branches and sequels. So, you make a plan, what can go wrong, you rehearse that, you try to figure that out. And so we do that in the workplace, and as a general rule, our company is very successful at it. And so we do generally figure it out. We figure out great ways to do it. We stay efficient and we build with high quality. So it's a really impressive thing to see the organization move that. But it's been born over decades of working together, learning how to solve problems in the way that our company does, and how it brings in all the resources and all the people that come together that provide input and boundaries and rules and regulations and SOPs and all of these different things. And I was thinking about the parallel to recovery. Recovery is very similar, and you can quote unquote figure it out. You can actually figure it out in the best way by doing what I just said, bringing in all the resources, bringing in people who can help you, asking for input. In some cases, in a relational context, sometimes the input comes to you whether you want it or not. But that's good. I mean, it's important to get that kind of input as you figure it out and as you move through it. So I just wanted to kind of go through a couple things tonight as I'm talking it through. And once again, these are things that I repeatedly say to men in the groups, and these were things that I learned myself. So I think the first thing that is applicable to anybody who's been wounded, or anybody who's been through something, or anybody who's in some sort of relational difficulty. And that is the greatest gift that you can give to your loved ones is the most healed version of yourself. And actually, to extend that a little bit, it's the greatest gift that you can give to yourself too. And so, we've all been wounded in the world, and some have been wounded more, some have been wounded less. It's not a competition. It's about living into our full life. And sometimes we need to go through a process that helps us process these wounds. And for some folks, talk therapy is fantastic, and they can get to the root and move on. And some folks need deeper healing modalities. Some of the stuff that Kylene does with her clients, or EMDR, or brain spotting, or, I don't know, psychedelics, who knows? But my point is that, pursuing that mindset of healing. There's so many of us, and I was thinking about this, I'm 54 years old, and I was discovered when I was 49, right? So you can argue that the better part of 3.5 decades, I was engaging, not every day and not every month and all that stuff, but engaging in what could be, unhealthy habits and patterns. And I had the gift to be discovered at 49 and to turn my latter half of my life into a path of healing that gets greater each day, and I learn things each day, and I keep trying to find ways that will help me process through some things. And there's, even though I'm at 5+ years, I still feel certain comments or words, or I still feel that, and sometimes I say, well, what else do I need to do? What else do I need to get in there and heal? And I notice when I do that, and I think we've talked about this on this podcast, is I show up in a much more safe and kind way for Kylene, and it's allowed us to move forward relationally. I relate to my son so much better. He's followed a similar professional path that I have. He's gone to the military academy. He's going to be an Army officer here shortly, and so that's very similar. And so we've been able to talk with open and honest critiques, and I'm able to look at him with empathy, and I'm able to understand maybe where he's coming from. But I didn't get there automatically right after discovery. I had to go through a healing process. I had to work through a lot of my own limiting beliefs. But it's been a real gift. And actually, to be honest, so did Kylene, and so did our son. And he went through a lot of healing paths, and he worked with therapists, and so we have now been able to show up for each other in a very, very kind, whole way that allows us to hold each other up at various points. And, that's what creates the beauty in a relationship. And so, it's always like, how do you know if you still have a wound? And I think a lot of times it's one of the clearest examples is you're angry. You get angry about something. That means you haven't processed through something. It doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't make you evil, but it's usually an indicator that, hey, you got some cleanup to do. And it's not just, I think what I've learned is not just saying, well, I'm sorry, I'll never get angry again. It's like, no, you got to kind of understand where that came from. What was that fear? Why did it show up the way you did? Why are you telling yourself that story? Or, what's the components behind the story that you're telling yourself about that situation that made you so angry? So once again, I think the greatest gift that you can give to your loved ones and you is the most healed version of yourself. And in some cases, those of you who are in relationships, that relationship may end. But in a lot of cases, because of children or because of proximity in a town, you're still going to run into each other. And so, or you're still going to have to interact with each other. So imagine if, as opposed to spending the next, 50 years of your life being in constant struggle and maybe at an impasse, imagine if you could move kindly towards each other, because at some point, the reasons behind divorce, they fade away. After time goes by, those things fade away. And so, it's important for you to do that, and it's important for your shared kids. For those of you who are single, getting ready to, maybe get into a relationship, the same thing applies. The healthier you are before you move into a relationship, the better you're going to show up and be authentic. And I think people like authenticity, and people like when you're secure in your emotions, and people like when you're willing to accept responsibility. And so that's a really important thing. And I said a word there that would be the next thing that I say, and that's take responsibility. So don't forget that you have, if on the side of the act, is you have caused great harm. And this is not comparable to your spouse not taking out the trash. I mean, this is a major emotional trauma that has impacted the relationship. And certainly you have your wounds. You have your wounds, and those wounds have created in you these adult patterns that wreak havoc. And yeah, you have your reasons, and you need to work through that. Kind of like I said at the beginning, you got to work on that healing, but you got to take responsibility for that. You got to take responsibility for the hurt you've caused. Carl Lentz has this podcast called Lights On, and he says because he cheated on his wife, that he has lost the ability to ever win an argument. Now, I don't know if that's his way of just saying, hey, I committed the ultimate wrong. I committed the ultimate damage to this relationship. And I know what he's trying to say. What he's trying to say is, I need to take responsibility for this. And if there's a point where Laura and I disagree, well, maybe he says something, to try to argue it, and then he goes, you know what? you'll always have. You'll always have that because I did this devastating thing to you and really blew up our lives. So take responsibility. And if you're having a hard time understanding what taking responsibility is, I'd encourage you to do a little bit of self-study on that. There's a lot of great resources out there on taking responsibility and owning things. And I've mentioned it before, but the book Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink is a really good one. And it kind of says, hey, if you're in the situation you are, there's always something else you could do to make that situation better. And so, sometimes we are so closed-minded in our thinking that we're like, well, I'm doing everything, and why isn't it getting better? I was like, there's always one more thing you can do. And his is a little bit more kind of work-related, but it's a really good book when it comes to talking about taking responsibility. The third thing I would say is your betrayed spouse is not required to hold your emotions while she is trying to heal from her own betrayal. It's not her job. Now, is it okay to want her to help you with that? Absolutely. And part of it is, you're trying to get used to this connection that maybe you had with her before betrayal being completely disrupted. And so maybe the patterns where you would come in and somebody would help you through this, or you're learning more things and you want to share them with your spouse, but she's just not ready. It's not her job. It's just not her job to do that for you. She has to get to a point, and if she gives you clear boundaries that says, hey, I don't want to hear about the things you're learning about with your addiction, you got to respect that. You have to absolutely respect that. And sometimes what I'll hear is the betrayer will say, well, I'm doing all these things, I have all these boundaries, and and I've heard all of this stuff about how horrible I am. I've got a couple things I want to talk about too. I'm like, well, I don't think that's a very good idea. So you've got to understand that of course there are relational difficulties, but when we have behaved in the way that we've behaved, by looking at pornography or having affairs, it all the other stuff pales in comparison to that. So you got to understand that. You got to remember that. So, but I'll take it a step further. Like, okay, well, what do we do with those emotions? What do we do? You don't want to squelch them. You don't want to push them down. You don't want to, because that's why you became an addict. It's because we squelched the emotions. So what you want to do is you want to use the groups that you're in. And you want to, talk to your buddy. You want to give them a call, or, maybe there's a safe family member that you can process this through, or an emergency session with your therapist. Sometimes guys will go to therapy on a Monday and then they're flying high and they're feeling great. And then Tuesday, maybe the wife gets triggered again and they're back in distress. And, in some cases, some therapists will have emergency sessions for you. I know mine did. There were a couple points, I think 2 or 3 through my recovery process where I needed some emergency work. I absolutely needed some time to go and walk things through with him, and he made himself available. And so the point being is you've got to find your healing has to be multidimensional, meaning your healing process has to be multidimensional. So you have to understand that it's not your wife's job, who you have betrayed's job, to heal you. She may choose at some point to come in and help you heal. She may choose to come in and say, hey, I'd like to understand what you were learning about tonight in the group that you were in, or how did therapy go? And Kylene was always very interested in me, in the things I was learning, but then she'd get triggered, and it was at that point I had to be present for her. And I didn't always do it right. And there were times when I felt a little bit of that resentment, like, man, I'm doing so much and stuff like that. And that's okay. I mean, those feelings are okay, but those are the feelings that you journal, you check in on your faster scale, you pick up, the phone and call one of your guys in the group, the accountability group, and you talk to them and say, hey, I'm feeling this emotion. And a lot of times what happens is it's really nice because just a short 15 to 20 minute conversation with a guy in your group who's detached from the situation, and he can give you some perspective and allow you to kind of calm down, remind you about taking responsibility, or remind you that, hey, maybe this is the story you're telling yourself. One of the things that a lot of guys will do as they move through this process is they will mind read. That it'll be, fill in and let's just use an example. The wife is mad at you, right? So she says, I'm really upset at you and I can't believe you did this. And then mind reading, we say, she just wants a divorce. She wants me out of here. All she wants to do is just drag me through the mud for the rest of her life. She didn't say that. You put that in your mind, and you did that because you're in a difficult situation and you're not quite sure how to manage it. So, just remember, use your counselors, use your group members. I think the last part of that would be is set good expectations for yourself. I think sometimes what I see and what I'll remind people of is, hey, how long have you been in this? And they'll say, well, 3 months, but things were going well, but now she's mad at me again. I'm like, remember, 3 to 5 years. It's a 3 to 5 year process if you're really working the tools every day. 3 to 5 years. So 3 months is not 3 to 5 years. And 3 years is not 5 years. So just remember, this is a long process. And of course, things are going to go differently. And a lot of times what happens is you do have those moments where is deeper connection because you're learning things and she's seeing that learning in you and she's starting to lower her guard, but then all of a sudden she gets activated again, and the trauma of what has happened to her, charges back up, and so she maybe gets angry or wants to look at your phone or looks at the checking account or wants to know where you are or whatever, and so that's just part of it. So that leads into the next point, which is, and I just mentioned it, the process is a long one. It is a long one, and I mentioned earlier. I can estimate that I was unhealthy sexually for three and a half decades. And, obviously the behavior escalated, way up to the point there. And so I've been in recovery for 5 years. So it takes a long time to unwind patterns that have been ingrained in you for decades. And that may not be everybody's case, but even if, let's say you're in your 20s, let's say it might have been 7 years, 7 to 15 years, your 30s, it goes up from there. And so it's going to take some time. And it's not just putting blockers on your phone. And it's not just, getting a dumb phone or something like that. You've really got to go through the work to try to really, really unravel this. So 3 to 5 years, I always ask that question. When guys say, hey, I'm having a difficult time or I'm feeling pulled, this is even for somebody who's single. Hey, I'm just not feeling good today, or I'm a little discouraged by where it's at. And I always say, well, how long has it been? And have you been working the tools, all the time? One of the, and I'll go into a little bit of the tools, but one of the tools that I think, there's 2 books that I think are fantastic, and I would encourage everyone to read this, both The Betrayed and The Addicted. And I recommend this all the time. It's the book Unwanted by Jay Stringer, and it's the book The Great Sex Rescue by Sheila Wray Gregoire. And so the one thing that Jay Stringer talks about in the book Unwanted is we gotta explore our sexuality with curiosity. So all too often, and I'm this way too, is when the addict part of us has been there, we want to cut it out like a cancer. We don't want it to be around anymore. We want to, take it off of us and throw it into the woods. But it is a part of us. And if we just shut it out, it's going to come knocking again. And so Jay Stringer really goes into his and he would obviously do a much better job summarizing this, but he is talking about how you can approach your sexuality with curiosity. It is telling us something about ourselves and something about our wounding story. And if we approach it with curiosity, we can find greater ways to heal. And so I can't recommend that book enough. The book is called Unwanted by Jay Stringer. The second book is The Great Sex Rescue by Sheila Gregoire. And that is really good because it upends a lot of if you grew up in an evangelical church or purity culture, or maybe just general sex, like the culture now says, essentially that men, need it, and that we're mindless idiots when it comes to it, and we're not. We actually can have control. And so she really upends a lot of that thinking and that, I guess you could argue, theology around that message that women need to be present for men in that way. And it really creates, I know, this particular book, I read it early on in my recovery, and it really helped free me from some of that bad ideology that's out there, that bad programming. And I remember thinking this, prior to discovery and into discovery, like, I guess I'm just going to have to learn to live with this. Like it'll never be gone. It's just going to be a part of me. And early on, by reading that book, I discovered that, oh no, it doesn't have to be. It's how my mindset can shift, and then of course bringing Unwanted in to help that as well. So let's talk a little bit using those books are great tools in the toolkit. Let's talk about some additional tools. And I think the first one would be is you got to get into a group. And maybe you don't need to be in a group for the rest of your life, but you got to get into a group. And the group is where you're surrounded by other men who are not going to judge you. And that's what's really nice about it. And I think men feel that after their first meeting is they're like, hey, nobody's judging me. And this particular behavior comes with a lot of fear of judgment. And so it's really nice to get into that group. Now, preferably you would get into a group that is trauma informed, that teaches you more and more tools like the Conquer series does to get you from A to B and do things like list your 10 worst moments and write a 10-year letter to yourself and teach you how to journal and get you into the faster scale. And those are all really, really meaningful tools. But there's another tool that I've talked about on here before called the 3 circles tool that is very, very important. Define your green behavior, define your yellow guardrails that would indicate to you that you're slipping a little bit. And then of course, define your red behaviors. Those are really, really important exercises. Therapy is another one. And once again, trauma-informed therapists, there's always a root to this behavior. And what we want to do is being discovered or being found out, and this may be a crazy thing to say, but it's a gift because all of a sudden now we're shining a spotlight on something that you wanted to keep hidden or keep away for the rest of your life. So now is the opportunity to get in there and get after it. And I think that kind of goes to my next point, which is really treat it like the crisis that it is. There's a lot of folks that will kind of dance around it almost as if they're starting a hobby. So, a hobby is you pick up pickleball and you go and you play the first game, and then maybe you go buy some paddles and they sit in your trunk, and then maybe you go in another week, but then you're busy on business travel, so you don't go again. And then you tweak your knee, so you don't do that again. And next thing you know, you've played pickleball 3 times. That's not the way you should approach this. It should be getting into a group immediately, getting into a therapist immediately, putting the guardrails down, really going after the work. If the group says call 3 people a week, you call 3 people a week. And if the group says, hey, you need to show up on time, do your best to show up on time. I know there are things out there, and there are very real things, like sometimes kids get sick. I get it. Sometimes your car breaks down. Sometimes the work pulls you away. I get it. But here's the thing I'll tell you is, and this is something that I tell guys too, is I run a group on Monday nights, and I run it like clockwork. It always starts at 6 and it always ends at 7:30. Sometimes guys can't make it. I always tell them, hey, there's more groups. So, for example, Pure Desire does online groups. There are other churches that run groups on Saturdays. There are therapists who run intensives. There are people who do different things. So, if Monday night is really, really hard for you, that's okay. Pick another date. Find another resource. Get plugged in somehow. There are a lot of online groups and online things out there. I think Fight the New Drug advertises something called Relay, and I think within Relay there are groups as well. And these are groups that are designed with tools to help you heal and to be accessible. Because a lot of us have crazy work schedules, and so maybe Monday night you can't make it. But if you're not going because you're watching Monday Night Football, I would argue that you're probably not treating this with the urgency and the intensity that you need to. So treat it like the injury and the wound that it is. And you won't regret it. Because I've seen some folks that'll go through it and they'll kind of dance around it, come on every other time, and they'll get to 3 years and then they're really depressed because they said, well, you said 3 to 5 years and that I would be healed. And I was like, well, yeah, but you never really did the tools and you didn't engage. And so it's 3 to 5 years when you're really, really engaged in it. So, that kind of goes back to taking responsibility for your healing. You got to show up. And I'll be honest, there's times when I get home from a day of work and it's been a long day and I don't even want to go and run the group, but I go. And this is the one thing I'll tell you. As soon as the first guy shows up and we say, hey, how's it going? The energy's there. The healing activity is there. The connection is there. And so that's what you're seeking out on a regular basis. And in some cases, some of your situations may be so bleak that the group is maybe one of the nice points early on, because you're maybe away from your wife who's asking a lot of questions, which she has a right to ask. Maybe you're away from, maybe a legal consequence. It's just a chance for you to kind of get some healing and be around some guys. I guess the final thing that I'll say is, you can't microwave yourself to success. And that's something that I do in the leadership coaching I do is, I've had the good fortune to set up and start 2 new manufacturing facilities. And it just takes time. You can't microwave yourself to success. What you're doing is you have established patterns through your life. Your life has been perfectly designed to make you an addict, to make you engage in this behavior. So you can't just change one thing. You've got to, by all intents and purposes, reinvent and perfectly design your life so that you are engaged in healthy activities. And that is a process. A workout program or a couch to 5K or running a marathon, it takes a lot of time. Learning how to play an instrument, it's not 90 days. These are long-term processes. And really what you're trying to do is you're trying to seek mastery in it. And so, because you don't want it to come back into your life. So if you say, hey, what does it take for me to seek mastery? And, there's a lot of estimates out there. It's, 10,000 hours or whatever that may be, but you can't microwave yourself to success and you can't get there quickly. So I hope this was a good reminder for people of some of the things that maybe you've heard, but maybe you needed to hear again. It's always nice to see guys come in early on into the groups and they're in such distress. I mean, such major distress. They've been found out, or maybe they've told their spouses or significant others, or maybe they've promised themselves that, hey, this is going to be the last time and I'll quit. And they don't, and it keeps coming up and they're desperate. And it's nice to watch them by the end of the group session start to get some relief. They're still in anguish. They're still tormented, but they're starting to see the path. And then you see them come in the next week and they've worked the tools and now they're a little bit more grounded. And then they come in a week later and they're even smiling and happy. And then you get into 30 days on, 60 days on, the next new guy comes in and they're ministering, they're basically saying, hey man, it's okay. These are important things. And it doesn't take long if you're working the tools. I will say, moving your spouse or you're having your spouse move up the trust ladder is going to take a while. And you just have to be patient with that. And you have to understand that there's still going to be some triggers. Kylene still gets triggered. And I handle them so much more, so much better than I ever used to. And a lot of it's because I think I keep in mind, number one, I'm responsible. Number two, I keep in mind that I'm not doing anything. I've really reached a high level of healing. So I can help her with her trigger as opposed to being defensive. And I also, am aware of my feelings and what's going on when that trigger's happening. So I can seek out help. And in our case, I can come back to Kylene and say, hey, when you said this the other day, I was and I'm a little bit of a slow processor, so I won't necessarily notice it right away. It takes me some time to put words to it. But we do come back as a couple and we start talking to each other again. And so we're able to work through that. Whereas I will say early on, I would just squelch it, but then ultimately bring it up to my group. And so that was the place to do that. So once again, I hope this was helpful. Good luck, keep going. And this much I can tell you is anybody is capable of healing. Anybody is capable of doing it. And it's your healing is directly proportional to the amount of work that you put into the healing activity. It really, really is. Read the books, listen to the podcast. Yeah, shameless plug for ours, right? Ours comes out every Wednesday morning. And you may agree or disagree with stuff that we say, but at least you're getting healing input. The Pure Desire one comes out every Tuesday morning. Those are 2 great podcasts. They come out every week. Well, Pure Desire is a great one. I'm biased on ours, but those are 2 resources for you that you can hear every week. And so you're immersed in it every Tuesday morning, every Wednesday morning. So you can hear those things. So I just encourage you all to just really treat it like the crisis it is. And that's all I got for tonight. So I wish you all the best and continue to heal. Thank you.
Woohoo! If you're listening to this, it means you've made it through an entire episode. Part of recovery is spending time engaging in healing and self-growth activities. We are thankful that you chose our podcast to be one of those activities today. Make sure you reward yourself for that accomplishment. If you've enjoyed this episode or this podcast, we would love to hear from you. Please take just a few moments to leave a rating and review, letting us know your experience with Recover You. We not only love hearing how these episodes are helpful, but ratings and reviews help others just like you who are searching for recovery information and support find the podcast too. We can't wait to hear from you. See you next week.